It began as a quiet spring morning in rural Nova Scotia. By 10 a.m. on May 2nd, Malehya Brooks Murray was on the phone with police, saying her children 6-year-old Lilly and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan had vanished from their home in Lansdowne Station. She told officers she believed they had simply wandered off. But within days, that simple story would fracture under the weight of conflicting sounds, redacted files, and one disappearing vehicle. Months later, RCMP case files revealed something strange. 2 nearby residents told investigators they had heard a loud vehicle moving back and forth near the Sullivan home in the early hours before the children were reported missing. The first witness, Brad Wong, lived on higher ground above Gairloch Road. He said the sound echoed through the valley, headlights flashing over treetops as the vehicle came and went several times after midnight. According to police notes, Wong told them the engine left and returned at least 3 or 4 times. Each time, it stopped near the family's address, idled, then drove off again. About a week later, investigators interviewed another neighbor, Justin Smith. Smith said he had talked with Wong and heard the same vehicle on Highway 289, turning near the railroad tracks close to Lansdowne Station Road. Smith added that Wong believed the vehicle belonged to Daniel Martell, Malehya's partner and the children's stepfather. Smith told police he'd been awake that night and counted the sound 5 or 6 times before it finally disappeared into the darkness. Yet despite those vivid recollections, the RCMP found no camera footage, no dashcam records, no tire tracks, only testimony carried by night air. When contacted by the Canadian press, Daniel Martell called the claims complete nonsense. He said his vehicle never moved out of the yard that night or the following day and that the car was not loud by any stretch of the imagination. Martell insisted the neighbors were mistaken, saying the sound could have been anything else in the rural valley, farm trucks, ATVs, or wind carrying echoes through trees. That clash between 2 witnesses who swore they heard movement and a stepfather who swore he slept through silence became the heart of the Sullivan mystery. RCMP documents confirmed they searched the entire property, traced possible vehicle routes, and reviewed video sources but found nothing that proved a car ever moved. In a case built on absence, the loudest evidence was still just a sound. At first, it seemed like an ordinary Thursday morning in Nova Scotia's countryside. By 10 a.m. on May 2nd, Malehya Brooks Murray was on the phone with police, reporting that her children, 6-year-old Lilly and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan, had vanished from their home in Lansdowne Station. She said they must have wandered off, but before that day was over, what began as a missing child search would start to unravel into something far stranger. RCMP teams swept through fields, ponds, and logging trails. They used search dogs, helicopters, and drones. For weeks, they found no trace. Then, months later, documents filed in court revealed new testimony, accounts that hinted at a mystery moving quietly through the dark. 2 neighbors told investigators they had heard a vehicle that shouldn't have been there. The first witness, Brad Wong, lived on a rise overlooking Gairloch Road, less than a kilometer from the Sullivan home. He told police that in the early hours of May 2nd, he heard a loud vehicle leaving and returning several times. Through his window he could see lights glinting above the trees, the beam sweeping like a lantern across the valley floor. Wong said the vehicle seemed to travel down toward the family's driveway, idle for a moment, then pull away. It returned again 3, maybe 4 times, until the sound faded after 2 a.m. He said he stayed awake, uneasy, because it wasn't common to hear engines on those gravel roads late at night. A week later, police visited Justin Smith, another nearby resident. Smith told them he'd spoken with Wong and had heard the same engine that night. He described it moving along Highway 289, turning near the old railroad tracks by Lansdowne Station Road, a loop that would pass close to the Sullivan property before climbing back toward town. In his statement, Smith recalled hearing the motor 5 or 6 separate times. To him, it sounded like a single vehicle circling in and out of the area. When police asked if he recognized the sound, he said Wong believed it was Daniel Martell's car, the same vehicle regularly parked in front of the Sullivan home. Those statements were entered into search warrant affidavits months later. They formed one of the few narrative threads left in an investigation where no video, no physical evidence, and no digital trail had emerged. If the car moved, as neighbors claimed, the data should have shown something: tower pings, camera flashes, tire marks. It didn't. Daniel Martell, Malehya's partner and the children's stepfather told the Canadian press that the accusations were complete nonsense. He insisted his vehicle never left the yard that night or the next morning. He added that it was not a loud vehicle by any stretch of the imagination. In his view, the neighbors had heard something else. Martell told reporters he returned home from visiting his daughter to find police and cadaver dogs already searching the property days later. He said he cooperated fully and passed a polygraph. To him, the idea that his own car was moving through the night while he slept was impossible. "Nothing about that makes sense," he said. RCMP records show officers did examine the family's vehicles and search routes around the property. They also reviewed nearby surveillance footage obtained under warrant. None of the video clips showed traffic matching the witness's timeline. For investigators, that absence was as confusing as it was revealing. The neighbors stood by their statements. Wang said he was certain of what he heard, an engine climbing the road again and again beneath his window. Smith said the sound was so distinct he counted each pass. Both described it as loud and unusual. Still, without visual proof, their accounts remained unverified leads. The RCMP's challenge was simple yet unforgiving. How do you prove something moved when nothing recorded it? Rural Nova Scotia has few security cameras, and cell tower coverage is thin. An engine heard in the valley could come from kilometers away, its sound bouncing between hills and forest lines. Still, police took the reports seriously. They logged every time the neighbors claimed to hear the vehicle and cross-referenced those hours with phone activity from the family's devices. So far, no link. The RCMP did not confirm whether they found any digital evidence of movement from Martell's car that night. The case files paint a scene of contradiction. Sound without signal, claims without correlation. To some officers, the vehicle reports were honest mistakes. To others, they were potential clues to how the children could disappear so completely. Either way, the noise in the night refused to fade from the record. Meanwhile, the investigation continued to widen. RCMP obtained warrants for phone records, bank accounts, and video from nearby businesses. They conducted at least 6 polygraphs, including tests on Malehya and Daniel. Both were reported as truthful. At that stage, police said they had no reasonable grounds to believe a crime had occurred. Even so, investigators kept probing the timeline. They returned to the night before the disappearance, May 1st, when the family was seen on Dollarama surveillance footage. After that, no one outside the home saw Lilly or Jack again. Whatever happened between that footage and the morning call remains the unbroken gap at the center of the case. When questioned about the vehicle rumors, Martell maintained his calm. He told reporters he understood why police had to check every lead and that he wanted them to find the truth. "I pray for the best resolution possible," he said, "that Jack and Lilly are found safe and healthy." His words were hopeful, but for many, the question about the car still hung in the air. Police records note that dogs trained to detect human remains searched the property and surrounding woodland but found nothing. No scent, no trace, no physical clue. To investigators, that absence reinforced the possibility the children had wandered away or been taken somewhere beyond the search grid long before anyone noticed. If a vehicle was involved, it may have moved during those early hours when few people were awake and no cameras covered the rural roads. But the lack of evidence makes that theory impossible to prove. All that remains is the contradiction, sound versus silence, belief versus denial, recorded forever in the RCMP files. Today, half a year after Lilly and Jack disappeared, the vehicle story still divides those following the case. To some, it's the most shocking clue yet, a phantom car that may have held the answers. To others, it's a misheard engine in a sleepy valley. For RCMP investigators, the truth lies somewhere in between, buried not in the noise, but in the silence that followed it. After months of searching, the RCMP's command center in Bible Hill turned into a maze of maps, logs, and recordings. Every officer working the Sullivan case knew the same question. If 2 neighbors heard a car, why couldn't they prove it existed? Investigators went back over the witness statements line by line, measuring the distance between each house, the angle of the valley, the direction of the wind. They visited Wang's property again, standing on his deck at midnight with sound meters. The valley swallowed noise in strange ways. A tractor 2 kilometers away could sound as though it were right outside the door. Still, Wang was adamant. He said he had lived there long enough to know every local engine by heart, and this one didn't belong. Detectives logged the sound test results and compared them to highway use data from that night. Few registered vehicles passed the area between midnight and 4 a.m. unmatched Martell's make or model. RCMP analysts highlighted that gap in red. No confirmation, no contradiction, only absence. To check the digital side, officers obtained warrants for the family's cell tower data and home network router logs. If any phone inside the house had connected to a new tower, or if the car's Bluetooth had paired with the device, the system would have recorded it. The files came back blank. No device left the property during the hours in question. Silence, again. Investigators didn't stop there. They turned to physical clues. Technicians swept the driveway for fresh tire impressions, comparing them to Martell's vehicle pattern. Weeks of weather and foot traffic had erased everything. Even the dirt roads that crossed toward the railway were smoothed by rain. Every trace the witnesses described had been washed clean. The official notes described the investigators' frustration. Multiple reports of vehicle movement. One entry reads, "but no corroborating evidence found." Another simply states, "audible only." In a digital age where nearly everything is recorded, this case has managed to hide in an analog silence. When asked about those results, Daniel Martell repeated his denial. "My vehicle never moved, period." He told the interviewer that the family was asleep by 10 p.m. and that he woke up only when daylight filled the kitchen. He said the noise the neighbors heard might have been the wind or heavy trucks on Highway 289. He didn't blame them, he said. People want to help. Sometimes they hear what they expect to hear. Inside the RCMP file, his polygraph chart lies stapled behind the witness summaries. The examiner's comment reads, "Truthful response is obtained." So the stepfather's denial stood as credible as the neighbor's certainty. Two truths, both recorded, canceling each other out. By midsummer, investigators were forced to widen the timeline again. They re-examined every minute between the family's last confirmed appearance on Dollarama security footage May 1st and the morning of May 2nd when Malehya called for help. If a vehicle moved that night, perhaps it wasn't Martell's, perhaps someone else entered the valley unseen. Yet no unfamiliar license plate appeared in any nearby business camera. Officers then cross-checked utility records, looking for power fluctuations that might show garage door movement or outdoor light activity. Nothing unusual. They reviewed dash cam submissions from delivery trucks, farm equipment, even a snow removal company still clearing back roads that week. Every reel came up empty. What remained were the sounds. The repeating engine, the crunch of gravel, the pauses that both witnesses described the same way: long, deliberate, like someone waiting for something. Investigators considered fatigue, memory distortion, even shared expectations. Could one man's story have shaped the others? Smith admitted he spoke with Wang before giving his own statement. That small detail complicated everything. Forensic psychologists advising the RCMP noted that auditory memory is fragile. Under stress, people often fill gaps with patterns. But they also warn not to dismiss matching accounts entirely. Two independent observations, even flawed, can still describe a real event, one analyst wrote. The absence of physical evidence does not prove the sound was imaginary. Through the summer, officers returned to the Sullivan property several times, each visit quieter than the last. The cadaver dog teams found nothing, no scent, no remains. The absence of discovery kept the case balanced between hope and dread. Officially, investigators maintained the disappearance was not believed to be criminal in nature. Unofficially, they still followed every unexplained echo. When journalists pressed for updates, RCMP spokespeople repeated the same line. The investigation remains active and ongoing. Behind that phrase sat gigabytes of unshared data and hours of interviews. Some officers believed the car theory was a dead end, others couldn't let it go. If you take away the vehicle, one investigator told colleagues, you remove the only movement anyone heard all night. In late August, as new warrant documents were filed, reporters finally saw those witness statements in print. Across Canada, readers fixated on one detail: the neighbor's certainty that the car belonged to Daniel Martell. Within hours, headlines twisted it into accusations. Martell responded immediately, calling the claims false and harmful. My vehicle never left that yard, he repeated. RCMP checked everything. I'm not the story the kids are. His frustration echoed what police themselves were facing, a narrative running faster than the facts. In a world hungry for villains, denial often sounds suspicious. Yet the data, the cold, numerical backbone of the case supported him. No GPS movement, no cell tower drift, no mechanical trace. Just 2 ears hearing something no machine could. As autumn arrived, investigators logged their findings in a final seasonal summary. Vehicle activity unsubstantiated. Witness accounts unresolved. Continue searching for alternate explanations. Even now, that line defines the Sullivan file. The missing car may never have existed, or it may have been the single thread that slipped through the cracks of an imperfect investigation. The mystery endures because both possibilities remain believable. In one version, 2 neighbors misheard the world. In another, a vehicle moved unseen through the night, carrying the truth with it. Between them stands Daniel Martell's quiet denial and the empty yard he swears never changed. And somewhere beyond that yard, the voices of Lilly and Jack Sullivan still echo through every unanswered question. The case file closes its autumn entry with a single phrase: status open. When the sound of the phantom vehicle faded from the witness files, investigators turned to what could not fade: data. The RCMP's digital forensics unit in Halifax was now holding drives, phones, routers, and the small SanDisk USB handed in by the children's great-grandmother, Patty Pearson. Each item was a possible time machine, capable of replaying the missing night in fragments of code. The USB was unlike anything else in the file. It contained a video, not surveillance footage but a homemade recording of a telephone call. In the clip, Patty holds her landline phone on speaker, filming the conversation with a second device. The voice on the other end belonged to Darren Geddes, a relative who had begun posting theories about the disappearance on social media. Geddes claimed he knew what happened to Lilly and Jack and hinted that Malehya Brooks Murray herself might be involved. But as the RCMP transcript notes, he offered no proof. He spoke in circles, then admitted it might only be his theory. When police met him later in person, he became, in their words, confrontational and evasive. Still, the USB was catalogued as potential evidence. Forensic technicians verified the file's authenticity. Metadata showed it had been created on June 21 and copied to the flash drive 5 days later. Nothing suggested tampering, yet the content raised a moral riddle. Was this evidence, or gossip captured by fear? RCMP CPL Charlene Jordan Curl wrote that the recording could assist with locating the children by identifying further investigational avenues. That was bureaucratic language for "we don't know yet, but we can't ignore it." At the same time, investigators discovered another digital anomaly, a deleted app. Malehya told police she had used Text Plus, a Wi-Fi calling application, to contact her mother and grandmother after she realized the children were missing. The reason sounded harmless: spotty cell service. But she admitted she deleted the app soon after, saying she didn't need it anymore. To digital analysts, deletion is never just absence, it is an event with a timestamp. RCMP requested her Text Plus records from May 1 and 2, the hours bridging the vanishing car and the morning she called for help. Weeks later, the company sent back data under court order. Much of it remains redacted in the public files, but one line stands out. The RCMP believed the information could identify further investigational avenues. That vague phrase appeared again and again in the documents. Each time it hinted at something found: a call log, a login, a moment when the phone came alive as others slept. Investigators cross-referenced the Text Plus timestamps with the neighbor's vehicle statements. Some entries lined up within the same hour window as the reported engine sounds. Correlation was not proof, but it was enough to keep the car theory from dying. Behind closed doors, analysts built a timeline overlay, rows of colored bars representing calls, data pings, and sound reports. To outsiders it looked like modern art, to investigators it was a map of uncertainty. The USB conversation sat weeks after the disappearance but spoke about that same night. The Text Plus logs sat inside it. Somewhere between those layers, they hoped to find a pattern. One detective described the process as listening to data. Every digital artifact had its own tone, a login ping, a file save, a deletion event. Together they formed the rhythm of the house that night. What they heard was quiet, but not silent. There were brief surges of activity around midnight and again near 3 a.m., then nothing until morning. Those two spikes mirrored the witness accounts almost too neatly. RCMP did not publicly acknowledge the coincidence, but internal notes mentioned temporal consistency between auditory and digital observations. It was the closest the files ever came to admitting that the sound of the car might have been real. Still, there was no GPS trace of Martell's vehicle, and the polygraphs for both parents remained clear. The RCMP could not declare anyone a suspect. In court affidavits, they repeated that they had no reasonable grounds to believe a criminal offense has occurred, yet they kept every digital warrant open. In cold cases, reasonable grounds can change with a single byte. Reporters who obtained the less redacted documents noticed that the text plus section was the most heavily censored. Entire paragraphs blackened. That alone suggested ongoing analysis. The RCMP later confirmed through spokesperson Alison Jarrett that the remaining redactions reflect ongoing concerns related to privacy and continued protection of the investigative process. To the public, those black lines looked like walls. To investigators, they were bookmarks, places to return when new data arrived. Forensic teams had already begun overlaying the text plus records with the USB metadata and neighbor statements. Their goal was not to solve the case overnight but to eliminate impossibilities until only one sequence remained plausible. Inside the lab, a senior analyst printed the timeline on paper, a 10-meter strip across the floor. Colored pins marked every verified event. The Dollarama video on May 1st at 2:14 p.m., the neighbors reported vehicle sounds around 1 a.m., the morning call to police at 10:03. Between those pins lay blank space, and in that blank space sat both clues, the deleted app and the phantom car. Analysts wondered if the USB conversation might help decode the gap. They transcribed Geddes' words carefully, phrases like "I know where they are," and then seconds later, "I could be wrong." They highlighted each time he mentioned a car or road. He never said Daniel by name, but he did reference that vehicle they used. It was enough to trigger cross-checks with the witness statements. If Geddes was guessing, he had guessed with details that existed nowhere outside the sealed files. How he knew them remains unexplained. RCMP notes say they questioned him about his sources, but he refused to answer and ended the interview. He later appeared online under the name Derwood O'Grady, repeating the same story and adding, "Could be wrong, could be speculation." By autumn, investigators had begun treating the USB and text plus data as a single digital cluster, not directly related, but orbiting the same window of time. Together they outlined a pattern of communication and silence, movement and deletion. If the vehicle truly moved, some device must have moved with it. If no device moved, then perhaps the car existed only in sound. Either way, RCMP officials knew they were chasing evidence that lived in contradiction, a case where truth and absence occupied the same space. The final autumn report summed it up in 9 words: vehicle activity unsubstantiated. Digital analysis continues for correlation. Months later, that line still defines the investigation. The witnesses heard something, the data recorded almost nothing. Between those two realities stands a mother who deleted an app, a family member who pressed record, and a stepfather who swore the car never moved. The RCMP may yet find a connection linking them all, or prove that none exists. For now, the files remain open, and in the quiet halls of the RCMP data lab, the USB's tiny indicator light still blinks each time it's plugged in, a digital heartbeat from a night when sound and silence became the same thing. For months the Sullivan file had lived on monitors and in spreadsheets, but the story behind those numbers was human, imperfect, frightened, and deeply divided. The RCMP investigators who spent nights scrolling through signal logs often said the same thing: every dataset has a heartbeat behind it. In this case, that heartbeat belonged to a family whose trust was already gone. Malehya Brooks Murray rarely spoke to reporters. When she did, her voice was cautious, flat, as though any wrong word could be turned against her. She repeated that she loved her children, that she believed they had wandered off, and that she hoped the search would find them. Beyond that, she said little. Every silence she left behind became another paragraph for strangers to fill. Daniel Martell handled the attention differently. When journalists called, he answered. He defended his home, his vehicle, his name. He reminded anyone who would listen that he had passed the polygraph and that police themselves had said the disappearance was not believed to be criminal. But denial, even when true, never sounds complete. Online, fragments of his quotes were taken as evidence of guilt. Within weeks of the new court releases, the investigation had escaped the courthouse and landed in public forums. Comment sections speculated about the USB, the text plus logs, the car. Each redacted line became a blank canvas for theories. People wanted to solve the mystery themselves. In doing so, they turned living people into characters. Inside the family, that spotlight burned hotter. Patty Pearson's decision to record the call with Darren Geddes had started as self-protection, but once it entered the RCMP files it became a fracture. Geddes accused her of betraying him. Malehya stopped answering messages. For investigators, family tension was both a symptom and a tool. Estrangement can surface new details. Guilt and fear often push people to talk, yet in this case, everyone withdrew. Even Geddes, so vocal online, stopped responding to follow-up questions. The only voice that remained consistent was Daniel Martell's, tired, defensive, but still cooperative. The RCMP's communications team now faced its own problem: how to inform the public without poisoning the investigation. When the partially unsealed documents were released, they offered transparency and confusion in equal measure. Reporters could quote phrases like temporal correlation or further investigational avenues, but the context stayed hidden behind black lines. To an officer, that sentence means, "We're still working." To the public, it sounded like, "We're hiding something." Every effort to clarify made the mystery thicker. Even the RCMP's insistence that the case was still open felt like a loop, the same assurance repeated for months while nothing visibly changed. By late autumn, frustration replaced speculation. Search volunteers drifted away, the valley returned to its routines. The family house stood at the end of its gravel drive, quiet except for the creak of trees in the wind. Daniel told one interviewer that he still checked the yard lights each night, just in case. He said he prayed for the children's return and for the investigation to move forward, whichever direction it needed to go. His words carried no anger, only exhaustion. "I know what people think," he said. "I just want the truth, even if it hurts." Behind those personal pleas, digital analysis continued quietly. RCMP technicians revisited the USB metadata, aligning it with the text plus timestamps once more. The overlap remained thin, unproven, but real. Investigators debated whether to treat it as coincidence or connection. Without new evidence, it was impossible to decide. In internal memos, officers began using a different term, information void. It described what happens when the physical world and the digital world contradict each other so completely that neither can be trusted alone. The Sullivan case, they wrote, was the purest example they had ever seen. Outside that void, public memory was fading. News outlets moved on to other stories. Only a handful of reporters still called the RCMP for updates. When asked what progress had been made, the spokesperson gave the same careful line. "We continue to follow every lead." It was true, but it no longer sounded convincing. By winter, the RCMP's internal report stretched hundreds of pages. Each page told the same story from a different angle. Witnesses who heard, parents who denied, analysts who searched. Yet the conclusion was always missing. One detective wrote in the margin, "The data ends where the people stop talking." In the end, the investigation became less about proving what happened and more about preserving what was left: documents, timelines, recordings, silence. Every unanswered question was catalogued, every rumor archived. The USB was stored in an evidence locker under climate control. 6 months after the disappearance, the Canadian press published a follow-up. The article repeated much of the known information but added one quiet sentence. "The case remains active, though no new evidence has been announced." For those still following, that was both comfort and grief: comfort that the search hadn't ended, grief that it still needed to continue. Among investigators, a phrase began circulating: "Nothing proves, everything suggests." It captured the paradox perfectly. The witnesses suggest movement. The data suggests stillness, the USB suggests suspicion. The deletions suggest coincidence, but nothing, not one piece, proves the fate of Lilly and Jack Sullivan. That hope is what keeps their names on every report, what compels officers to reopen drives, what brings journalists back to the valley. Because even now, The question of that night whether an engine truly moved through the dark or whether the sound belonged to something else refuses to rest. The RCMP's closing note for the year reads like a confession of limits. Without physical discovery, it says, digital indicators remain inconclusive, and below that, in a different hand, someone added a line rarely seen in official files: hope persists. That hope is what keeps their names on every report, what compels officers to reopen drives, what brings journalists back to the valley. Because even now, the question of that night whether an engine truly moved through the dark or whether the sound belonged to something else refuses to rest. In the end, every investigation leaves behind two stories. The one we can prove, and the one we still feel in our bones. The Sullivan case sits between them. Two witnesses swear they heard an engine. A father swears it never moved. Police files hum with data that refuses to agree. A USB blinks in storage. An app once deleted still echoes in a server log somewhere. Maybe the car existed, maybe it didn't. But what we know for certain is that somewhere, sometime, two children disappeared and the world fell quiet around them. That silence isn't emptiness, it's information we haven't yet learned to read. Every redacted line, every erased message, every unanswered call may still hold a pattern waiting to be understood. Until then, investigators keep listening, not for noise but for meaning. Because in Canada's coldest cases, truth rarely shouts, it whispers. It hides in hard drives, in witness memories, in contradictions that refuse to die. If you believe the silence still has something to say, stay with us. This is True Child Cases. Subscribe for updates, share what you know, and keep the search alive. Every detail, every file, every memory could be the one that finally tells us what really happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan.